You're listening to Scary Sleep Stories presents The Dark Hours.
Welcome, guys. I know a lot of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before you drift off like the video, subscribe if you're new, and comment what time it is right now. Let's see who's still awake and who's not alone tonight. Let's begin.
The moment I saw Nurse Samantha slip those vials into her purse, I knew I was in for the longest night shift of my life. What I didn't know was that it would also be the most dangerous. My name's Mike, and I've been working as a janitor at St. Andrew's Hospital for almost a year now. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills, and most nights, it's pretty quiet. I do my rounds, mop the floors, empty the trash, and generally keep the place tidy for the day shift. Nothing too exciting. That all changed on a Tuesday night in October. I remember it clearly because it was unseasonably cold, and I'd forgotten my jacket at home. I was shivering as I pushed my cart down the dimly lit corridors of the third floor, the wheels squeaking slightly with each turn. It was around 3 a.m. when I first noticed something off. Nurse Samantha, one of the night shift regulars, was acting strange near the supply closet. Now, Samantha had always been a bit intense. She was a big woman, tough as nails, with a reputation for being volatile. Most of the staff gave her a wide berth. But this was different. She kept glancing around nervously, checking over her shoulder as she fumbled with the door lock. My curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly wheeled my cart closer, pretending to be engrossed in wiping down a handrail. What I saw next made my blood run cold. Samantha carefully opened the closet and began removing vials of medication, stashing them in her bag. This wasn't just grabbing an extra Band-Aid or some gauze. These were serious drugs, the kind kept under lock and key. I froze, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, but another part, the part that valued my safety, told me to keep quiet. Samantha was a big woman, and I'd seen her lose her temper before. Plus, if she was stealing drugs, who knew what else she might be capable of? I decided to keep my head down and observe. For the rest of my shift, I kept a discreet eye on Samantha. She moved from room to room, administering medications as usual. But every now and then, when she thought no one was looking, she'd slip something into her pocket or purse. As the night wore on, my anxiety grew. I couldn't just ignore what I'd seen. Patient lives could be at stake. But how could I expose her without putting myself in danger? Around 4 a.m., I saw my chance. Samantha disappeared into the supply closet again. This time, I positioned myself nearby, pretending to mop the floor. When she emerged, I could see her bag was bulging, the outline of vials visible through the fabric. I took a deep breath and decided to confront her. "Samantha," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I saw what you were doing in the supply closet." She froze, her eyes narrowing as they met mine. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, her tone defensive. "I saw you taking medication," I replied, fighting to keep my voice low. "You're smuggling drugs out of here." Her face turned red with anger. Before I could react, she lunged forward, grabbing me by the collar of my uniform. "You don't know what you're talking about," she hissed, her face inches from mine. "Mind your own business." I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Samantha was unpredictable, and I knew I had to tread carefully. "I'm not going to let this go," I said firmly. "I have to report it." Her grip tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually hit me. But then she let go, shoving me backward. I stumbled, nearly losing my balance. "If you say anything," she growled, "I'll make sure you regret it." With that, she stormed off, leaving me shaken and unsure of what to do next. I knew I couldn't just let this slide, but I was terrified of what Samantha might do if I reported her. For the next hour, I went about my duties in a daze, constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting Samantha to jump out at me. My mind raced with possible scenarios. What if she cornered me in a deserted part of the hospital? What if she had accomplices? As dawn approached, I made my decision. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. What if a patient got the wrong medication or not enough because of Samantha's theft? I had to do something. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone in the janitorial closet and dialed the hospital administrator's emergency line. To my relief, Dr. Patel, one of the senior physicians, answered. "Dr. Patel," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to report something. It's about Nurse Samantha. She's been stealing medication from the supply closet." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's a serious accusation, Mike," Dr. Patel said gravely. "Are you sure about this?" I recounted what I'd seen, my voice growing steadier as I spoke. Dr. Patel listened intently, asking a few clarifying questions. "All right, Mike," he said finally. "You did the right thing by reporting this. Stay where you are. I'm coming down there now, and we'll handle this together." The next few minutes felt like hours as I waited for Dr. Patel. Every sound made me jump, convinced it was Samantha coming to confront me. When Dr. Patel finally arrived, accompanied by 2 security guards, I nearly wept with relief. We found Samantha in the break room, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Her face drained of color when she saw us enter. "Samantha," Dr. Patel said, his voice firm but calm, "we need to talk about some missing medication." What happened next was a blur. Samantha tried to run, but the security guards blocked her path. As they restrained her, her bag fell to the floor, spilling out dozens of vials and syringes. The evidence was undeniable. Samantha broke down, alternating between sobbing and shouting threats at me. As the security guards led her away, Dr. Patel put a hand on my shoulder. "You did a brave thing, Mike," he said. "You may have saved lives today." In the days that followed, the full extent of Samantha's theft came to light. She'd been stealing drugs for months, selling them on the street to feed her own addiction. The hospital implemented stricter security measures, and I was commended for my bravery. But the experience left its mark on me. For weeks, I jumped at every shadow, convinced Samantha or one of her contacts might come seeking revenge. I considered quitting, finding a job where the most dangerous thing I might encounter was a slippery floor. But then I remembered Dr. Patel's words. I had made a difference. I had potentially saved lives. And that thought gave me the courage to keep going. Now, months later, I still work the night shift at St. Andrews. The halls are quiet once again, but I approach my job with a new sense of purpose. I'm not just keeping the floors clean, I'm keeping an eye out, staying vigilant. Because I learned something important that night. In a hospital, every role is crucial. From the surgeons to the janitors, we're all part of a team dedicated to saving lives and keeping patients safe. And sometimes, that means having the courage to speak up, even when it's scary. As I push my cart down the corridor, the wheels squeaking softly in the night, I feel a sense of pride. I'm not just a janitor. I'm a guardian, a protector of this healing place. And if another Samantha ever shows up, well, I'll be ready. The night shift may be long, and at times it may be dangerous. But it's my shift, my responsibility, and I wouldn't have it any other way. The moment I saw the envelope slip under my hotel room door, my heart stopped. In a foreign country, with no money, no ID, and a growing sense that I was being hunted, that innocent-looking piece of paper might as well have been a ticking bomb. I'd always dreamed of traveling the world. When I finally saved up enough for a solo trip to Greece, I thought I was embarking on the adventure of a lifetime. Little did I know, it would turn into a nightmare that would test every ounce of my strength and wit. The first few days in Athens were everything I'd hoped for. I explored the Acropolis, savored authentic Greek cuisine, and lost myself in the vibrant streets of Plaka. The city was a sensory overload in the best possible way, and I fell in love with its blend of ancient history and modern energy. On my 4th night, I returned to my small hotel room, exhausted but exhilarated from a day of sightseeing. As I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something was off. My bag, which I distinctly remembered leaving on the chair, was now on the floor. At first, I brushed it off as faulty memory, but when I checked inside, my stomach dropped. My wallet, passport, and phone were gone. Panic set in immediately. I was alone in a foreign country with no way to prove who I was or contact anyone for help. I rushed to the hotel reception, my hands shaking as I explained the situation. The receptionist looked concerned and called the local police for me. The officers who arrived took my statement, but I could tell from their expressions that they didn't hold out much hope. Thefts like this were common, they explained, especially in tourist areas. They advised me to go to the American embassy in the morning to get a temporary passport. That night was one of the longest of my life. I barely slept, jumping at every sound in the hallway, convinced the thief might return. When morning finally came, I made my way to the embassy, my nerves frayed and my spirit dampened. The embassy staff were sympathetic but bureaucratic. They took my details and said it would take a few days to process everything. In the meantime, they provided me with some emergency cash and helped me find a cheaper hostel to stay in while I waited. As I settled into my new, more Spartan accommodations, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the theft. There was something more sinister at play. I kept catching glimpses of people watching me. A man in a dark suit at a cafe across the street. A woman who seemed to be following me through the market. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the situation was making me imagine things. But then came the envelope. I had just returned to my room after another frustrating day of waiting for news from the embassy. The plain white envelope lay there on the floor, innocuous yet terrifying. With trembling hands, I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message scrawled in messy handwriting. "Stay away. This is your only warning." My blood ran cold. What did it mean? Stay away from what? Who was warning me? And why? I called the front desk immediately, explaining about the envelope. They assured me they would take it seriously and increase security measures. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old hostel made me jump. I kept imagining footsteps outside my door, shadows moving under the crack. When morning finally came, I was a wreck. I decided I couldn't stay in my room feeling like a sitting duck. I needed to be around people, to feel some semblance of safety. I went down to the lobby, planning to camp out there for the day. As I sat in a worn armchair, pretending to read a book while actually scanning every person who entered, I noticed a man watching me. He was middle-aged, with salt and pepper hair, and a face that looked like it had seen too much sun. When he realized I had spotted him, he approached. "American?" he asked in a thick accent I couldn't place. I nodded warily, my body tensing for flight. He leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're in danger. They think you have something that belongs to them." Before I could ask who they were or what they thought I had, he was gone, melting into the crowd outside the hostel doors. My mind raced. Was this connected to the theft? Had I somehow stumbled into something bigger than a simple robbery? I felt like I was in the middle of a spy thriller, except this was terrifyingly real. I spent the rest of the day in a state of hypervigilance, constantly looking over my shoulder. Every stranger on the street became a potential threat. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, hunted. As night fell, I knew I couldn't go back to my room. It didn't feel safe anymore. I walked the streets of Athens, moving from one 24-hour cafe to another, never staying in one place too long. The city that had seemed so magical just days ago now felt oppressive and dangerous. Around midnight, I saw them, two men in dark clothes, moving with purpose through the thinning crowds. They were scanning faces, and I knew instinctively they were looking for me. I ducked into a narrow alleyway, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they would hear it. I heard their footsteps at the entrance of the alley. "She must have gone this way," one of them said in Greek-accented English. I pressed myself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. They were so close I could smell the cigarette smoke on their clothes. Just when I thought they would discover me, a cat knocked over a trash can further down the alley. The noise startled them, and they moved past my hiding spot to investigate. I didn't wait to see if they would come back. As soon as they were out of sight, I ran. I had no destination in mind, just an overwhelming need to get away. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I found myself near the ancient agora. The ruins stood silent in the moonlight, a reminder of a civilization that had endured far greater challenges than what I was facing. Somehow, that thought gave me strength. I spent the rest of the night moving from shadow to shadow, always alert, always watching. As dawn broke, I made my way back to the American embassy. I didn't know if I could trust them, but I had nowhere else to turn. To my surprise, there was already someone waiting for me. The salt and pepper haired man from the hostel. He flashed a badge identifying him as an Interpol agent. "We've been watching you," he said, his tone softer than I expected. "You unknowingly checked into a hotel that's a front for a major counterfeiting operation. They thought you were one of us." The relief I felt at finally understanding what was happening was overwhelming. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. The danger had been real. The next few days were a whirlwind. I gave statements to Interpol and the local police. My stolen belongings were recovered, minus the cash. The Interpol agent, whose name was Dmitri, explained that the theft had been a standard tactic to keep tourists quiet about what they might have seen in the hotel. As I finally boarded my flight home, my emotions were mixed. I was relieved to be safe, but also strangely exhilarated. I had faced my worst fears and survived. I had been alone in a foreign country, hunted and afraid, and I had made it through. The Greece I was leaving wasn't the Greece I had arrived to see. The romantic notions of ancient ruins and Mediterranean beaches had been replaced by a grittier, more complex reality. But I was leaving with something far more valuable than tourist snapshots. I was leaving with a newfound confidence in my own resilience. As the plane took off, I looked out at the twinkling lights of Athens below. I knew that somewhere down there, life was going on as usual. Tourists were exploring the Acropolis, locals were enjoying late-night souvlaki, and yes, probably some criminals were plotting their next move. But I was different now. I had seen the darker side of travel, and I had survived it. Whatever challenges lay ahead in my normal life back home, I knew I could face them. After all, they couldn't be scarier than being hunted through the streets of a foreign city, right? As Greece faded into the distance, I smiled to myself. This might not have been the trip I planned, but it was certainly one I would never forget. And isn't that, after all, what travel is all about? The moment I saw his eyes in the flickering lamplight, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The man I'd rescued from the churning sea wasn't a victim of the storm. He was its human embodiment, and I'd just invited chaos into my sanctuary. I've been the keeper of the Morro Point Lighthouse for nearly 2 decades. It's a solitary life, but one I've grown to love. The rhythmic flash of the beacon, the crash of waves against the rocky shore, the cry of seagulls, these have been my constant companions. I've weathered countless storms from my perch high above the ocean, always feeling safe and secure within these sturdy stone walls. But nothing could have prepared me for that night. The storm had been raging for hours, one of the worst I'd seen in years. The wind howled like a banshee, rain lashed against the windows, and lightning split the sky in jagged bursts. I was up in the lantern room, making sure the light stayed strong and true, when I saw him. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Surely, no one could be out in that maelstrom. But there he was, a lone figure clinging to a piece of driftwood, being tossed about by the angry waves like a rag doll. My training kicked in immediately. I radioed the Coast Guard, but they were swamped with other emergencies and couldn't reach us for hours. I knew that by then, it would be too late. I've always prided myself on being a decent man, the kind who'd help a stranger in need. So, I did what any good lighthouse keeper would do. I went out to save him. The journey from the lighthouse to the shore was treacherous. The wind nearly knocked me off my feet several times, and the rain made it almost impossible to see. But somehow, I made it to the water's edge. I waded in, the icy waves slapping against my chest, threatening to pull me under. The man had drifted closer to shore, but he was clearly exhausted, barely hanging on. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to grab him and drag him onto the beach. He was a sorry sight, soaked to the bone, shivering violently, his eyes wild and unfocused. I helped him to his feet and half carried, half dragged him back to the lighthouse. Once inside, I sat him by the fire, wrapped him in blankets, and pressed a mug of hot tea into his trembling hands. It was only then, in the warm glow of the hearth, that I got a good look at him. He was younger than I'd first thought, probably in his early 30s. His face was gaunt, with hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes that seemed to burn with an inner fire. There was something unsettling about those eyes, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Thank you," he said, his voice raspy from the salt water. "I thought I was done for out there." "What happened?" I asked. "How did you end up in the water?" He looked down at his mug, a shadow passing over his face. "My boat capsized. I was the only survivor." I nodded sympathetically, but something about his story didn't sit right. His clothes weren't those of a sailor, and he had no other signs of having been on a boat. No life jacket, no identifying tags, nothing. "I'm John," I said, trying to shake off my unease. "I'm the lighthouse keeper here." He looked up at me, those unsettling eyes boring into mine. "Martin," he replied simply. As the night wore on, Martin became more talkative. He asked questions about the lighthouse, about my life here, about the surrounding area. His interest seemed innocent enough, but there was an intensity to his queries that put me on edge. I tried to radio the Coast Guard again, but the storm was interfering with the signal. We were on our own, at least until morning. As I prepared a makeshift bed for Martin in the living quarters, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a mistake in bringing him here. But what choice did I have? I couldn't have left him to drown. I showed Martin to his room and retreated to my own, locking the door behind me, something I'd never felt the need to do before. Sleep eluded me that night, my mind racing with doubts and fears. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke with a start to the sound of movement outside my door. The storm had died down, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I glanced at my clock, 3:27 a.m. Quietly, I got up and pressed my ear to the door. Footsteps, moving stealthily down the hallway. I held my breath, listening intently. The steps paused outside my door for a moment, then continued on. My heart pounding, I cracked open the door and peered out. In the dim emergency lighting, I saw Martin's figure disappearing around the corner, heading towards the lantern room. I followed, trying to keep my footsteps silent on the metal stairs. As I reached the top, I heard Martin's voice. He was talking to someone, his tone urgent and low. "I'm in," he was saying. "The old fool bought my story hook. Line and sinker. We can move forward with the plan." I felt my blood run cold. Who was he talking to? What plan? I must have made a noise because suddenly, Martin fell silent. I barely had time to duck back down the stairs before he emerged from the lantern room. "John," he called out. "Is that you?" I didn't answer, my mind racing. I needed to get to my radio to call for help. But to do that, I'd have to get past Martin. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out into view. "Just checking on you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thought I heard something up here." Martin's face was a mask of innocence, but his eyes, those burning eyes, told a different story. "Just admiring the view," he said smoothly. "It's quite something up here." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further. We stood there in uncomfortable silence for a moment before I excused myself. saying I needed to check on something downstairs. As soon as I was out of sight, I raced to the radio room. My hands shook as I tried to establish a connection with the Coast Guard. "Mayday, mayday," I whispered urgently into the mic. "This is Morrow Point Lighthouse. I need immediate assist." A hand clamped down on my shoulder, spinning me around. Martin stood there, all pretense of friendliness gone from his face. Now, John," he said, his voice cold and hard. "We can't have you doing that." What followed was a desperate struggle. Despite my age, I'm still strong from years of maintaining the lighthouse. But Martin was younger, quicker, and driven by a manic energy I couldn't match. We crashed around the room, knocking over equipment and furniture. I managed to land a solid punch to his jaw, but he retaliated by slamming my head against the wall, leaving me dazed. Through the fog of pain, I saw Martin pick up a heavy wrench from my toolbox. He raised it high, a look of grim determination on his face. "I'm sorry it had to come to this, old man," he said, "but I can't let you interfere." Just as he was about to bring the wrench down, a blinding light flooded the room. We both turned to see a Coast Guard helicopter hovering outside the window, its searchlight trained directly on us. Martin's moment of distraction was all I needed. I lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. We grappled on the floor as shouts and footsteps thundered up the lighthouse stairs. Moments later, the room was filled with Coast Guard officers. They pulled Martin off me, quickly restraining him. As they led him away, I learned the truth. Martin was part of a smuggling ring that had been using remote lighthouses as drop-off points. They'd been planning to take over Morrow Point for months, seeing it as the perfect, isolated spot for their operations. The storm that had brought Martin to my door had been entirely manufactured, a ploy to gain entry to the lighthouse and overpower its solitary keeper. In the days that followed, as I nursed my bruises and gave statements to various law enforcement agencies, I couldn't help but reflect on how close I'd come to disaster. My desire to help, my basic human decency, had nearly been my undoing. But as I stood in the lantern room, watching the beams sweep out over the calm sea, I realized something. Yes, there was darkness in the world. Men like Martin who would exploit kindness for their own gain. But there was also light. The Coast Guard who had come to my rescue. The officers who worked tirelessly to bring the smugglers to justice. Even my own stubborn refusal to give in. These were all beacons of hope in their own way. I decided to stay on as keeper of Morrow Point. This lighthouse had been my home for too long to abandon it now. But I'd be more cautious in the future, more discerning about who I let into my sanctuary. As night fell and I lit the beacon once more, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was more than just a lighthouse keeper. I was a guardian, a protector of this small corner of the world. And come storm or smuggler, I would stand my ground. The light flashed out across the waves, strong and steady, and I stood watch, ready for whatever the night might bring. The moment he slid into my back seat, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary ride. There was something in his eyes, a wild, desperate look that sent a chill down my spine. Little did I know, I was about to become an unwitting accomplice in a night that would push me to my limits. I'd been driving for Uber for about 6 months, mostly to supplement my day job income. It was usually pretty uneventful. Drunk college kids, business people running late, tourists trying to cram in as many sites as possible. But this night was different from the start. It was around 2 a.m., that dead time when the bars have closed but the city hasn't quite woken up yet. I was thinking about calling it a night when the ping came through on my app. The pickup location was in a part of town I didn't know well, mostly abandoned warehouses and shuttered factories. I hesitated for a moment, my gut telling me to ignore it and head home. But the promise of one last fare won out, and I found myself navigating through the maze of darkened streets. As I pulled up to the address, I saw him, a man in his mid-30s, dressed in dark clothes, standing in the shadow of a graffiti-covered wall. He was looking around nervously, like he expected someone to jump out at him at any moment. "You the Uber?" he called out as I approached. I nodded, forcing a smile. "That's me. Where are we headed tonight?" He didn't answer immediately, just slid into the back seat and shut the door. The car filled with the smell of sweat and something metallic that I couldn't quite place. "Just drive," he said, his voice low and tense. "I'll give you directions as we go." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to kick this guy out and speed away, but I was already moving, merging back onto the empty street. We drove in silence for a while, the man occasionally muttering directions. We were heading out of the city, towards the more rural outskirts. The buildings grew sparse, replaced by fields and the occasional farmhouse. "So," I said, trying to break the tension, "late night or early morning for you?" He grunted in response, his eyes fixed on the side mirror. "You always this chatty?" I shut up after that, focusing on the road ahead. The silence in the car was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional ping from my phone. After about 20 minutes, he suddenly barked, "Pull over here." We were in the middle of nowhere, a dirt road stretching out on either side of us. There was nothing around except for an old, dilapidated barn about 100 yards off the road. "Look, man," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I don't know what's going on here, but shut up and listen." He cut me off. For the first time, I saw something glint in his hand, a knife. My blood ran cold. "Here's what's going to happen," he continued, his voice eerily calm. "You're going to wait here. I'm going to take care of some business in that barn. When I come back, you're going to drive me back to the city. No questions asked. Got it?" I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. "Good," he said. "And just so we're clear, if you try to leave or call anyone, things will get very unpleasant for you. Understand?" Another nod. He got out of the car and walked towards the barn, disappearing into the shadows. As soon as he was out of sight, I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My mind was racing. What had I gotten myself into? Was this guy a drug dealer? A killer? Should I try to make a run for it? I looked at my phone. No signal, of course. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. Every sound made me jump. The rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant hoot of an owl. I kept expecting to hear gunshots or screams, but there was nothing. After what felt like an eternity, I saw movement by the barn. The man was coming back, and he wasn't alone. There was someone else with him, stumbling along like they were injured or drugged. As they got closer, I could see it was a woman. Her hands were tied behind her back, and there was a gag in her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. This wasn't just some shady deal. This was a kidnapping, and I was in the middle of it. The man shoved the woman into the back seat, then got in beside her. "Drive," he commanded. I put the car in gear, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. As we pulled away, I caught the woman's eye in the rearview mirror. The fear and desperation I saw there made my decision for me. I had to do something. We'd been driving for about 10 minutes when I saw my chance. Up ahead was a sharp bend in the road, with a steep drop-off on one side. I took a deep breath, sent up a silent prayer, and made my move. As we approached the turn, I suddenly jerked the wheel hard to the right. The car skidded, tires squealing on the asphalt. The man yelled, caught off guard. Before he could react, I slammed on the brakes and threw the car into park. In the moment of chaos, I scrambled out of the driver's seat and yanked open the back door. The woman tumbled out, and I grabbed her arm, pulling her with me as I ran. I could hear the man shouting behind us, the sound of his footsteps getting closer. We ran towards a dense patch of trees, the uneven ground making us stumble. Suddenly, a shot rang out. The man had a gun. The woman stumbled, letting out a muffled cry through her gag. I pulled her behind a large tree, both of us breathing hard. Come out," the man called. his voice echoing in the night. "You're only making this worse for yourselves." I looked at the woman, trying to convey with my eyes that she should stay quiet. Slowly, carefully, I untied her hands and removed the gag. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Another shot rang out, closer this time. We flinched, pressing ourselves against the tree trunk. "I have an idea," I whispered back, "but it's risky." She nodded, willing to try anything. I picked up a large rock and threw it as far as I could in the opposite direction. The sound of it crashing through the underbrush caught the man's attention. We heard him moving away from us, towards the noise. "Now!" I hissed. We ran, no longer caring about being quiet. Our only hope was to get back to the road to find help. We burst out of the tree line, the road just ahead of us, and there, like a miracle, was a pair of headlights approaching. I waved my arms frantically, yelling at the top of my lungs. The car slowed, then stopped. It was an old pickup truck, driven by a bewildered-looking elderly man. "Please," I gasped. "We need help. There's a man with a gun." Before I could finish, another shot rang out. The old man's eyes widened in fear, but to his credit, he didn't drive off. Instead, he reached over and flung open the passenger door. "Get in," he yelled. We didn't need to be told twice. We piled into the truck, the woman practically in my lap in the cramped cab. As we sped off, I saw the man emerge from the trees in my side mirror, his face contorted with rage. The old man, who introduced himself as Frank, drove us straight to the nearest police station. The next few hours were a blur of statements and questions. The woman, whose name was Lisa, had been kidnapped by the man, her ex-husband, who had been stalking her for months. As dawn broke, I sat on a bench outside the police station, exhausted but relieved. Lisa came out and sat beside me. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You saved my life." I shook my head. "I'm just glad we both made it out okay." She squeezed my hand, and we sat there in silence, watching the sun rise on a new day. In the weeks that followed, I gave more statements, identified the man in a lineup, and eventually testified at his trial. He went away for a long time. I stopped driving for Uber after that night. The experience had shown me how quickly an ordinary situation could turn dangerous, but it had also shown me something about myself, that when pushed to the limit, I was capable of more courage than I ever thought possible. Now, whenever I see an Uber drive by, I say a little prayer for the driver and their passengers, because you never know when a simple ride might turn into the most harrowing journey of your life. I never thought a garden gnome could be a harbinger of terror, but as I stared at the ceramic figure mysteriously placed on my porch, its painted eyes seeming to follow my every move, I realized my quiet life in this small town was about to take a sinister turn. My name's Sarah, and I moved to Millbrook about 6 months ago. After years of hustling in the big city, I was ready for a change of pace. Millbrook seemed perfect, a quaint rural town where everyone knew their neighbors and life moved at a slower rhythm. I bought a charming little house on the outskirts of town, with a spacious yard that I dreamed of turning into a vegetable garden. The first few months were idyllic. I spent my days working remotely from my sunny home office, and my evenings tending to my budding garden or chatting with neighbors over the fence. One neighbor in particular, Tom, seemed especially friendly. He lived in the house next door, a middle-aged man with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and an easy smile. He was always offering to help with yard work or home repairs, which I appreciated as a single woman living alone. It was Tom who first pointed out the gnome. I was watering my tomato plants one evening when he called over the fence. "Hey, Sarah, when did you get the new garden decoration?" I looked up, confused. "What decoration?" He pointed to my front porch. "The gnome. Cute little fella." I felt a chill run down my spine. I hadn't bought any gnome. Excusing myself, I walked around to the front of the house. There it was, A typical garden gnome, about a foot tall, with a red hat and a cheerful expression, but something about it felt off. I picked it up gingerly, looking for any clue as to where it came from. There was nothing. No tag, no marking, nothing. Just smooth, cold ceramic. Probably just a welcome gift from one of the neighbors. I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. I placed the gnome back on the porch and went inside, determined to forget about it. But I couldn't. That night, I kept waking up, sure I had heard something moving outside. Each time I looked out the window, the gnome was there, its fixed smile visible in the moonlight. The next morning, I woke up exhausted and on edge. As I stumbled to the kitchen to make coffee, I glanced out the front window and froze. The gnome had moved. It was now facing the house, as if looking directly at me. My heart raced. I told myself I must have bumped it last night and not noticed, but deep down, I knew I hadn't touched it. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Every morning, the gnome would be in a different position. Sometimes it would be facing a different direction. Sometimes it would be in a completely new spot in the yard. I started taking pictures, trying to convince myself I wasn't going crazy. I thought about talking to Tom about it, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way he had been watching me lately, his friendly smile not quite reaching his eyes. Or maybe it was the fact that I had seen him outside at odd hours, always seeming to be looking towards my house. A week after the gnome appeared, I came home from grocery shopping to find my front door unlocked. I was sure I had locked it, I always did. Heart pounding, I entered the house, half expecting to find an intruder. Everything looked normal, but there was a faint smell I didn't recognize, a mix of cigarette smoke and something metallic. I called the police in, but they found no signs of forced entry. They suggested I might have forgotten to lock the door, or that perhaps a draft had blown it open. I nodded and thanked them, but I knew better. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house settling made me jump. I kept thinking I heard footsteps outside my bedroom door. When my alarm went off in the morning, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. Bleary-eyed, I went to make coffee and saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on my kitchen table, was the gnome. Its cheerful smile now seemed sinister, mocking. I backed away, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. I never brought the gnome inside. Someone had been in my house, in my safe space. With shaking hands, I called my best friend Lisa. "I need you to come over," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Something's wrong." Lisa arrived within the hour, concern etched on her face. I told her everything, the appearing gnome, the strange movements, the unlocked door, and now this. To her credit, she didn't dismiss me or tell me I was imagining things. "Have you noticed anything else unusual?" she asked, her brow furrowed. I hesitated, then told her about Tom, his over-friendliness, the odd hours, the feeling of being watched. Lisa's eyes widened. "Sarah, this isn't just paranoia. Someone is definitely messing with you. We need to call the police again." This time, the police took my concerns more seriously. They dusted for fingerprints and found several that didn't match mine. They promised to increase patrols in the area and suggested I install security cameras. Lisa stayed with me that night, and we spent hours setting up cameras around the house and yard. We moved the gnome to the backyard, placing it where it would be clearly visible on the cameras. The next morning, we reviewed the footage. For hours, nothing happened. Then, at around 3 a.m., a figure appeared on the screen. My heart stopped as I recognized Tom's silhouette. We watched in horror as he crept around the yard, eventually picking up the gnome and moving it to the front porch. "Oh my God," Lisa whispered. "Oh, Sarah, he's been gaslighting you this whole time." I felt sick. All those friendly interactions, the offers of help. It had all been a ploy to get close to me, to learn my routines. We called the police immediately. They arrived quickly, reviewed the footage, and went to Tom's house with a warrant. What they found there chilled me to the bone. Tom's house was filled with pictures of me, sleeping, working in my garden, even through my windows. He had been obsessively stalking me for months. The police also found detailed plans about how he intended to make me his. As they led Tom away in handcuffs, he looked at me with a mixture of anger and something that looked unsettlingly like love. "We were meant to be together," he called out. "I was just trying to protect you." In the days that followed, I learned more about Tom's history. He had a record of stalking women in other towns, always moving on before he could be caught. Millbrook had been his latest hunting ground, and I had been his target. The gnome, it turned out, was his sick way of playing with me. He got a thrill out of making me question my sanity, of invading my space without me knowing. Each move of the gnome was a message. I can get to you anytime I want. It took a long time for me to feel safe in my home again. I installed better locks, got a security system, and even adopted a large dog. Lisa stayed with me for a few weeks, helping me process what had happened. Slowly, life in Millbrook returned to normal, or a new normal at least. My neighbors, horrified by what had happened, rallied around me. They checked in regularly, helped me reinforce my house, and made sure I was never alone if I didn't want to be. As for the gnome, I couldn't bring myself to keep it. Instead, I decided to turn it into something positive. I donated it to a local art project that raised awareness about stalking and domestic violence. Seeing it transformed, broken apart, and reformed into a beautiful mosaic helped me start to heal. Today, a year after that terrifying ordeal, I'm still in Millbrook. I've reclaimed my home and my peace of mind. My garden is thriving, and I've made genuine friendships with my neighbors. But I'll never forget the lesson I learned, that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones hiding in plain sight, wearing a friendly smile and offering a helping hand, and that a seemingly innocuous object, like a garden gnome, can be a silent sentinel of terror. Every now and then, when the wind blows just right, I think I hear the faint sound of ceramic scraping against wood. In those moments, I take a deep breath, remind myself that I'm safe and that the nightmare is over. But I always check my locks, just in case. The moment I heard the first gunshot echo through the forest, I knew our camping trip had just become a fight for survival. What started as a peaceful getaway with friends had suddenly turned into a nightmare, and the woods that once seemed welcoming now felt like a deadly maze. It was supposed to be a perfect weekend. My best friend Jake, his girlfriend Sarah, and my boyfriend Tom had been planning this camping trip to the Adirondacks for months. We were all desperate to escape the noise and stress of the city, to reconnect with nature and each other. If only we'd known what was waiting for us in those seemingly peaceful woods. We arrived late Friday afternoon, the sun already starting to dip behind the tall pines. The drive had been long, but the excitement of the adventure ahead kept our spirits high. We found a beautiful spot to set up camp, far from the designated campgrounds. Jake had insisted on going off the beaten path, saying it would give us a more authentic experience. None of us thought to argue. Setting up camp was a breeze. Jake and Tom handled the tents while Sarah and I gathered firewood. As darkness fell, we sat around the crackling fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The night sky above us was a blanket of stars, more than I'd ever seen in my light, polluted city life. It was breathtaking. "This is perfect," Sarah sighed, leaning her head on Jake's shoulder. "We should do this more often." We all murmured in agreement, feeling content and at peace. If only we'd known it was the calm before the storm. The next day, we decided to go for a hike. Jake had found a trail on his map that led to a secluded waterfall. "It'll be a bit of a trek," he said, "but the view will be worth it." We set off early, the morning dew still clinging to the leaves. The hike was challenging but exhilarating. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and small animals, the air fresh and invigorating. We stopped occasionally to take photos or admire particularly beautiful vistas. It was around midday when we reached the waterfall. Jake had been right. It was stunning. Crystal clear water cascaded down moss-covered rocks into a serene pool below. We decided to take a break, eat our packed lunches, and maybe even take a dip in the cool water. That's when we heard it. Voices carrying on the wind. At first, we thought it might be other hikers, but as the voices got closer, we realized something was off. The tones were angry, aggressive. "We need to hide," Tom whispered urgently, his eyes wide with fear. Without a word, we gathered our things and ducked behind some large boulders near the water's edge. From our hiding spot, we could see a group of men emerge from the trees on the other side of the clearing. They were rough-looking, carrying rifles and speaking in hushed, angry tones. "This is our territory," one of them growled. "We need to send a message to those city folks, show them they're not welcome here." My blood ran cold. Were they talking about us? How did they know we were from the city? We stayed hidden, barely daring to breathe, as the men continued their discussion. It became clear that they were some kind of local militia group, angry about outsiders coming into their woods. They talked about setting up traps, about teaching lessons to trespassers. After what felt like hours, but was probably only about 20 minutes, the men moved on. We waited until we couldn't hear their voices anymore before we dared to move. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Right now." No one argued. We began to make our way back down the trail, moving as quickly and quietly as we could. The forest that had seemed so welcoming just hours ago now felt oppressive and dangerous. Every snapping twig made us jump. Every rustle in the underbrush could be a threat. We were about halfway back to our campsite when we heard the first gunshot. It rang out loud and clear, followed by shouts and more gunfire. "Run!" Jake yelled, grabbing Sarah's hand. We took off, all thoughts of stealth forgotten in our panic. Branches whipped at our faces as we crashed through the undergrowth, the sound of pursuit growing closer behind us. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the green blur of the forest. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. Suddenly, Jake stumbled, crying out in pain. He'd twisted his ankle on a hidden root. Tom and I grabbed him, supporting him between us as we continued to move, slower now but still driven by desperation. We found a dense thicket and ducked into it, helping Jake sit down. Sarah worked to bandage his ankle with supplies from the small first aid kit she carried, while Tom and I kept watch. "What are we going to do?" Sarah whispered, fear evident in her voice. "We need to get back to the campsite," Tom said. "Get our phones. Call for help." "But what if they're waiting for us there?" I asked, the thought sending a fresh wave of panic through me. Before anyone could answer, we heard voices nearby. We froze, hardly daring to breathe. "They couldn't have gotten far," a gruff voice said. "The girl left a trail even a blind man could follow." I looked down in horror, realizing my shirt had torn on a branch, leaving behind small scraps of fabric. "We need to move," Jake whispered urgently. "They'll find us if we stay here." Despite his injured ankle, Jake insisted he could move. We helped him up, and once again we were on the run. But this time we moved more carefully, doing our best to leave no trail. As we crept through the forest, the sounds of our pursuers seemed to be all around us. A twig would snap to our left, voices would carry from the right. It was like we were caught in some twisted game of cat and mouse. Night began to fall, making our progress even slower. We were lost, exhausted, and terrified. But we kept moving, driven by the primal need to survive. It was Tom who spotted the cave. Hidden behind a curtain of vines, it seemed to offer a temporary sanctuary. We ducked inside, grateful for a moment's rest. "We can't keep running forever," Sarah said, voicing what we were all thinking. "We need a plan." "I say we wait until full dark," Jake suggested, "then try to circle back to the campsite. If we can get to our phones, we can call for help." It was a risky plan, but it was the only one we had. We settled in to wait, huddled together for warmth and comfort. Hours passed. The forest outside grew quiet, save for the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of a small animal. When we could no longer see anything beyond the cave entrance, we knew it was time to move. Our progress was painfully slow. Jake's ankle had swollen, making each step agony for him. We had to stop frequently to listen for any signs of pursuit. But somehow, miraculously, we made it back to our campsite. The sight that greeted us made my heart sink. Our tents had been slashed, our supplies scattered. It was clear the men had been here. "Quick," Tom whispered. "Grab anything useful and let's go." We worked fast, gathering what we could. I found my phone buried under some torn sleeping bags. The battery was low, but it was still working. With shaking hands, I dialed 911. The next few hours were a blur. We kept moving, always on alert, as I tried to describe our location to the emergency dispatcher. When we finally heard the whir of helicopter blades, I nearly wept with relief. The forest rangers found us just as dawn was breaking. We were dehydrated, exhausted, and traumatized, but alive. As they led us to safety, we learned that the men who had been chasing us were part of a known anti-government group. They had been causing trouble in the area for months. In the days that followed, as we gave statements to the police and tried to process what had happened, I found myself reflecting on how quickly our peaceful retreat had turned into a nightmare. The Adirondacks, which had seemed so beautiful and serene, had revealed a darker, more dangerous side. We had gone into those woods seeking adventure and connection. We had found those things, but not in the way we expected. Our brush with danger had bonded us in a way that no ordinary camping trip could have. We had seen each other at our most vulnerable, our most terrified, and we had pulled through together. As I sit here now, safe in my city apartment, I can still hear the echo of those gunshots, still feel the panic of being hunted through the darkness. But I also remember the strength we found in each other, the resilience we didn't know we had. Will I ever go camping again? I'm not sure. But I do know that whatever challenges life throws at me, I can face them. After all, I survived a night of terror in the Adirondacks. What could be scarier than that? The moment I saw their eyes in my rearview mirror, I knew I had stumbled into something far more sinister than a simple pit stop. What should have been a quick refuel had just become a desperate fight for survival, with an entire town seemingly intent on making sure I never left. It was supposed to be a straightforward road trip. I'd been driving for hours, making my way across the country to start a new job in California. The monotony of the highway had lulled me into a sense of security, the miles rolling by as I sang along to the radio and daydreamed about my fresh start. As the sun began to set, I noticed my gas gauge dipping dangerously low. I hadn't seen a station for miles, and the vast emptiness of the desert was starting to make me nervous. Just when I was beginning to worry, I spotted a sign, "Last Chance Gas, 5 miles." It wasn't a name I recognized, but beggars can't be choosers when you're running on fumes in the middle of nowhere. The exit ramp led me to a small, dusty town that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. Faded storefronts lined the main street, their windows dark and uninviting. The gas station stood at the far end, its neon sign flickering weakly in the twilight. As I pulled up to the pump, I noticed a group of locals gathered near the station's convenience store. They fell silent as I got out of my car, their eyes following my every move. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine, telling myself I was just being paranoid. "Evening," I called out, trying to sound friendly. "You folks know if this place is still open?" One of the men, a tall, lean figure with a weather-beaten face, stepped forward. "Sure is," he drawled, his tone oddly flat. "Why don't you go on inside and see Mitch? He'll get you sorted." I nodded my thanks and headed into the store, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere outside. The interior was dimly lit and cluttered, shelves stocked with dusty cans and faded packages. Behind the counter stood a man I assumed was Mitch, his rheumy eyes regarding me with an unsettling intensity. "Just passing through?" he asked as I approached, his voice gravelly from years of cigarettes. "Yeah, on my way to California," I replied, fishing out my wallet. "Could I get 40 on pump 3, please?" Mitch's eyes narrowed slightly. "California, huh? Long way from here. You sure you want to keep going tonight? We got a motel just down the road. Might be safer to rest up before hitting the road again." Something in his tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Thanks, but I'm good to keep driving," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll just get that gas and be on my way." Mitch shrugged, but I could see a hardness in his eyes that wasn't there before. He rang up the purchase silently, and I couldn't help but notice how his gaze kept flicking to something behind me. I turned, half expecting to see someone there, but there was only the empty store. As I walked back to my car, I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on me. The group by the store had grown larger, and they made no effort to hide their stares. I kept my head down, focusing on the task of filling up my tank, willing the numbers to tick by faster. Just as I was finishing up, I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. I turned to see the tall man from earlier, flanked by two others. Their expressions were grim, almost predatory. "You know," the tall man said, his voice low and menacing, "we don't get many outsiders round here. Folks tend to get lost, if you catch my meaning." My heart began to race. I fumbled with the gas cap, trying to appear calm. "Well, I appreciate your concern, but I really should be going." I made to get into my car, but one of the other men stepped forward, blocking my path. "Now hold on there," he said, his meaty hand coming to rest on my car door. "We can't in good conscience let you drive off into the night. Why don't you come with us? We'll make sure you're taken care of." In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that if I went with these men, I would never be seen again. With a surge of adrenaline, I shoved past them and dove into my car, slamming the lock down just as hands grabbed for the door handle. I gunned the engine, tires squealing as I peeled out of the gas station. In my rearview mirror, I could see the men running to their trucks. The whole town seemed to come alive, lights flicking on in houses and more vehicles pulling onto the road behind me. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel as I accelerated, pushing my car to its limits. The desert night flew by in a blur, punctuated by the glare of headlights in my mirrors. I could hear engines roaring behind me, growing closer with each passing second. I took a sharp turn onto a side road, hoping to lose them, but they knew these roads far better than I did. Every twist and turn I made, they matched. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. I couldn't outrun them forever, and my gas tank wouldn't last indefinitely. As I crested a hill, I saw Salvation, a highway in the distance, its steady stream of traffic a beacon of hope. If I could just make it there, I'd be safe. I pressed the accelerator to the floor, my engine protesting as I pushed it beyond its limits. The pursuing vehicles were right on my tail now. I could hear shouts and the occasional ping of something hitting my car. Were they shooting at me? The highway was so close, just a few more seconds. With a final burst of speed, I shot onto the on-ramp, merging into the flow of traffic. I weaved between cars, putting as much distance as I could between myself and my pursuers. When I finally dared to look in my rearview mirror again, I saw their headlights receding into the distance. They couldn't risk following me onto a busy highway. I didn't slow down until the sun began to rise, casting a pale glow over the desert landscape. My hands were cramped from gripping the steering wheel, and my whole body ached with tension. But I was alive, and I was free. When I finally felt safe enough to stop, I pulled into a busy truck stop, my legs shaking as I got out of the car. The events of the night felt surreal in the harsh light of day. Had I imagined it all? But the dents in my car door and the empty gas tank were stark reminders that it had all been terrifyingly real. I called the police from a payphone, my voice shaking as I recounted my experience. They took my statement, but I could hear the skepticism in the officer's voice. A whole town of crazed kidnappers. It sounded insane, even to my own ears. As I waited for my car to fill up, Surrounded by the comforting bustle of normal travelers, I couldn't shake the memory of those cold, predatory eyes. What would have happened if I hadn't gotten away? How many others hadn't been so lucky? I never did find out the truth about that town. In the years since, I've scoured maps and searched online, but I've never been able to find any trace of Last Chance Gas or the nameless town that nearly became my final destination. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if it even existed at all, or if it was some kind of mass hallucination brought on by exhaustion and desert heat. But then I look at my car, at the small dents that no body shop has ever been able to fully repair, and I know it was real. I know that somewhere out there, hidden in the vast expanse of the American desert, there's a town that preys on unsuspecting travelers, and I know how close I came to becoming just another missing person, another mystery for someone else to solve. I still take road trips sometimes, but I never drive at night anymore. And I always make sure my tank is full before I hit those long, lonely stretches of highway. Because you never know what might be waiting for you at that next exit, in those small towns that seem frozen in time. Sometimes, a pit stop can become a fight for survival, and the difference between life and death can be as simple as a full tank of gas.